Chapter 19. Emmett rubbed his eyes as he sat across from Bianca and Ted, all three of them sadly nursing takeaway cups of coffee. "Do you want to fill me in?" he asked, unable to hide his lack of enthusiasm. Sitting in the quiet police headquarters so early on a Saturday morning was not the way he had hoped to start the weekend. But he knew he was the last person who could complain. While he'd at least managed to get out and watch his son's school production the previous night, the homicide detectives hadn't stopped. "Sure." Ted flipped his notepad open. "We tracked the unknown number on Rosemary Norman's phone and have confirmed that it was a prepaid device, probably bought as a burner, which has since been dumped. It hasn't been active since July 13th, the night she was killed." Emmett nodded, holding a hand over his mouth as he tried to conceal a yawn. He'd seen those details come through late last night. There was no account set up for the handset, and it appears the device was purchased unofficially through a direct seller, presumably using cash. A direct seller? Yes, so at a market stall or in person, something like that. Ted shrugged. What's interesting, though, is that Natalie Gibson's phone also recorded movements in the St. Kilda area on the night when we believe she was killed. And there was also communication with an unknown number. Emmett looked from Bianca to Ted. "You're thinking Natalie went to St. Kilda after having her termination at the clinic?" "Perhaps. Or she was taken there by someone. It's certainly appearing that we need to put all our focus on the Ackland Street area where Rosemary was dropped off." "Okay." Emmett paused, scratching his head. Up until now, everything had revolved around Melbourne's inner northwest, where the women had lived and were found dumped. Who would they both have been meeting on the other side of the city? Did Morton have any luck with photography studios in the area? A picture of Natalie's carefully staged family portraits flashed in his mind. Bianca shook her head. "Not as far as I know. He's coming in later today, though, so I'm sure he'll keep going with that." "Forensic testing?" "There's numerous different DNA strands on the phone, and, not surprisingly, your teenage boy is already a positive match." Emmett drummed his fingers on the table. "So we've got two women with seemingly no connection who've both ended up in St. Kilda before being dumped in Flemington. And the last contact that they each had was with an unknown person, a man presumably, who was using a prepaid device." "That's right." "Hang on." Emmett shook his head. "Didn't you say you thought the handset had been dumped after Rosemary's murder? How could Natalie be contacting that same person?" "It wasn't the same number," Bianca clarified. "We believe the killer bought multiple prepaid phones and dumped them after each murder." "Let's hope he hasn't bought any more phones," Emmett muttered, before another thought crossed his mind. "Are we sure the women weren't involved in some sort of internet dating forum? That seems a likely scenario, surely." "We haven't had any hits for dating sites through their online searches," Ted said. "But we will keep looking." Emmett plonked his empty coffee cup down in exasperation. "What about Daniel Norman and Brian Gibson? Do either of their phone movements match the victims?" "No. Neither man's phone recorded being in the St. Kilda area on either of the days the women were killed." Ted shrugged. "But that only means that their phones weren't there, not that they weren't there themselves." "Are we expecting Mrs. Gibson's autopsy results today?" Bianca changed tack. "It would be good to get a time of death." "I'll call the pathologist's office later," Emmett sighed. "Is the taxi footage in yet?" "It was sent through last night, and we've identified the closest cross street to where Ms. Norman was dropped off. so I assumed you'd want us to head back out to St. Kilda and do some more door knocking. Absolutely. And get Carter to help you if you like. He should be in sometime in the next hour or so. And how was last night? Bianca finished her coffee, managing to successfully throw the cup into a waste paper basket in the far corner. Very, very underwhelming. Emmett chuckled, allowing himself to indulge in the memory. It had been good to watch his little boy performing for the first time. Not that he predicted a bright stage career for him. Nicholas had clearly been outside of his comfort zone, timidly stomping around the handmade set in a zombie costume, doing his best to remember the very average dance moves for his class's rendition of the Monster Mash. At least I got to be a zombie and not a tombstone, his son had said earnestly as they'd driven home. But I wish my vampire partner had turned up. I had no one to do the actions with. Could you tell? No, it looked great, Emmett had lied, despite the obvious absence of several classmates leaving gaping holes in the choreography. Oh, come on. School productions aren't meant to be fun, Bianca teased. I sat through my nephew's one the other day. It was the longest 2 hours of my life. 2 hours? Emmett gaped. You got lucky. I'm pretty sure we hadn't even got to intermission at the 2-hour mark. And don't get me started on that never-ending finale. Why give all the kids another routine to mess up? They can't manage one number, let alone two. Just stop. Bianca snorted as Emmett waved his arms around in mock zombie fashion. And he was surprised to see that even the ultra-serious Ted managed to break a smile. Oh, I can't wait until this is over. Emmett wiped his eyes, laughing. We're becoming delirious. Bianca smiled, about to go on, when the ringing of the reception phone interrupted. It's not even 9 a.m. yet, she muttered, heading to the door. Who on earth could this be? She returned a short time later, all signs of humour gone. What now? Emmett wasn't sure he actually wanted to know the answer. That was the Moonee Pond station, Bianca sighed, looking between her colleagues despondently. Another woman, with a similar profile to our two victims, has gone missing. The sheets were tangled around her legs, and as she tried kicking them away, Abby jumped at the feeling of bare skin brushing against her own. That's right, she remembered with a wry smile. She wasn't alone. Rolling over, she was happy to find Marcus still fast asleep, cradled somewhat awkwardly, his tall body almost too long for her cheap double futon mattress. Slipping out from under the covers, Abby tiptoed to the bathroom before assessing the state of her understocked kitchen. It was slim pickings. Opting for coffee, and perhaps the suggestion of a slow brunch at a cafe down the road, she returned to the bedroom, where Marcus was now lying awake, absent-mindedly scrolling through his phone. Coffee? She tilted her head so that her long hair flipped down over one shoulder. What? I made you coffee, she grinned, passing him her best mug. I need to get going. Marcus took the drink and put it on the floor beside the bed. You don't need to rush. She climbed back in under the blanket and stroked his arm. I thought you might like some breakfast. No, I've got work to do. On a Saturday? Yep. As she watched him get up, Abby couldn't help but notice how much older he seemed. The well-tailored suits that made up his work uniform hiding the thinning of his muscles, the slight sagging of his skin. It doesn't matter. He's still perfect. Did you want to take a shower? I'll get you a clean towel. No, I'll just get going. Marcus was already half dressed and frantically patting the top of her drawers. Have you seen my keys? I think you left them in the hall. Got them. Marcus returned a second later. I had a great time. I'll call you. Still under the blanket, Abby blew him a kiss and listened to the sound of the door closing. What an amazing night. She smiled as she leant back on her pillow. As she slowly sipped her coffee, she reached for her phone, surprised to find the home screen lit up with notifications. Shit. She scanned through the stream of missed calls and messages from her mother. Most had been sent the previous night, when she'd been getting drunker and drunker in the bar with the finance executives, but there were another few from that morning. I'm done with cleaning up your mess. You're old enough to take responsibility for your life choices. I mean it. I won't do it anymore. That's it. I'm coming over. Abby felt her chest squeeze as she read the last one. Her mother never came over to her apartment. Why would she do that? And how soon would she be there? The answer was obvious just minutes later, when the clanging of her security door forced her out of bed. Abby? Coming. Throwing a robe on and quickly wiping her face, she dashed down the hallway. The sun hit her with an intensity that made her squint. Her head pounded. What time was it? Really? Her mother looked her up and down with disdain. Abby found herself shrinking, aware the smell of stale alcohol was probably seeping from every pore. She looked from the duffel bags that had been dumped on her doorstep to her little boy, who was cowering behind his grandmother. What was going on? Hi, Spencer. She reached forward for his hand, but he pulled away. Is that all you've got to say for yourself? Her mother's eyes were wild, her lips thin. In case you hadn't noticed, he's still dressed in his vampire costume, ready for the show you couldn't be bothered taking him to. Abby looked at Spencer's pale face, his mousy red eyes blinking sadly from behind her mother's legs. I'm sorry, she said, feeling genuinely terrible. I got held up at work. Her mother snorted. I'm not doing it anymore, Abby. She yanked the security door wider open. I'm not watching you break his heart again. You have a choice to make. You're either in his life or you're out of it. What's it going to be? I'm in, of course. Abby bent down and reached for her son, who reluctantly allowed himself to be cuddled. As she held him close, her eyes again landed on the bags at her doorstep. What was her mother doing? Right. Well, in that case, Spencer is staying with you for a while. What? Abby stood up with a jolt, abruptly letting go of Spencer. Here? What do you mean? He sat on the porch crying all night because of you. Her mother snapped, nudging Spencer forward. And I lost a cleaning job. You can make up for lost time while I make up for lost income. But this is your last chance. Abby stood in the doorway in disbelief, watching as her mother stormed away. At her feet, the little boy seemed equally stunned. Okay, Spencer. She took his hand and led him inside. Well, this will be fun, won't it? It'll be like having a holiday camp with your big sister. Spencer sniffed, then broke into a coughing fit. Before locking the door, Abby retrieved the bags from the porch and flung them into the hallway. She couldn't be bothered unpacking them. Surely her mother wasn't actually going to leave him with her for more than a night. She would calm down once she was done with making her point. "Have you eaten?" she asked, before realizing that she had nothing to offer anyway. Spencer didn't respond. "How about some TV?" Leading him into the living room, Abby brushed a pile of clothes aside and made room for him on the couch. "What would you like to watch?" To her surprise, Spencer started sobbing again. "Oh, it's okay." She sat down next to him and flicked through the channels until she found a suitable children's show. Thankfully, it didn't take long before the little vampire started nodding off, curling himself up in a ball against her pile of dirty clothes. Abby smiled at his funny grunting sounds before leaning over and giving him a quick peck on the cheek. Her heart ached. So much lost time. Taking a towel off the indoor clothes rack, she placed it over her sleeping son and quietly retreated to her bedroom. Lying back down, she composed the perfect message to Marcus, thanking him for a great night and suggesting a catch-up the next day. Then she closed her tired eyelids and let herself drift off into a contented slumber. It was a good couple of hours before Owen Peters appeared in the foyer of the police headquarters. But when he did, Emmett immediately regretted letting Bianca and Ted leave for their door knock in St. Kilda. With red eyes and pallid skin, the teacher gave every indication that something was gravely wrong. "Thank you for coming in." Emmett shook hands firmly, unable to stop himself from mentally contrasting the sad man before him with the jovial sports instructor he'd last seen kicking footballs with his son. Owen attempted a smile, then mutely followed Emmett upstairs to his office. "Take a seat. Can I get you something? A warm drink, perhaps?" "No, thank you." The schoolteacher's eyes wandered the room, landing on the photos of Rosemary Norman and Natalie Gibson that were pinned to a wall. "You don't think..." Owen's words caught in his throat. "Those two women. I saw them on the news." "No, of course not." Emmett pulled his most reassuring expression. "Most of the time, there's a very simple explanation for why someone disappears. Why don't you tell me what's happened? You're worried about your partner, Charlotte, is that right?" "Yes." Owen sat up straighter, licking his lips. "I left her at a medical clinic yesterday morning. I had classes to teach, so she was going to make her own way home. But..." "She didn't come home?" Emmett asked gently. "No." Owen paused, his lower lip trembling. "I feel so stupid because I didn't even check in on her. I had such a busy day at school, and then there was the production last night. So it wasn't until almost midnight that I got home and realized something was wrong." "Does she have family or friends she might be staying with?" Owen shook his head. "No. I've called everyone I can think of. No one's heard from her. Plus, she's not answering her phone. That's not like her. Even if we'd had an argument, she'd still pick up. At least to tell me what a prick I'd been. She wouldn't ignore me. Not when she knew I was worried." "Okay." Emmett tapped his notepad. "And tell me about this medical clinic. Was Charlotte there for a particular treatment?" At this, the schoolteacher lost his composure. "It was a fertility clinic," he whispered, dabbing his eyes with a tissue. "We were trying to start a family. She was having IVF treatment." "What was the name of this clinic?" Emmett was aware he was holding his breath. Natalie was last seen at a medical facility. "Westside Health," He breathed out. It was a different place. Mr. Peters. Emmett placed a hand on the man's arm. I realise this is extremely difficult, but is there any reason you can think of as to why your partner might have chosen not to come home? Had there been some sort of disagreement? Money issues? That sort of thing? The teacher shook his head. She should have come straight home. That was her intention. Emmett withdrew his hand. And you've contacted the clinic? Yes. They said she left a little after 10 a.m. Where would she have gone? Emmett frowned. He didn't want to give the teacher the most obvious answer. To someone else's place. We're going to monitor this closely for the next 24 hours. We'll speak with the clinic and take a look at security footage around the area. If anything changes in that time, or you remember any other detail that might be important, I want you to contact me straight away. Owen sniffed loudly, then nodded. After seeing him out, Emmett returned to his office and sank in his chair. He was meant to be delegating all new missing persons cases to other units, but he wanted to give Nicholas's favourite teacher the utmost attention. Besides, he stared at the photos of his two victims on the wall. The Moonee Pond station was right to notify him about Charlotte. She was a similar profile to Natalie Gibson and Rosemary Norman. And the last thing he needed was for a third picture to be added up there.